Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. All right, welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and a very special welcome in the Northern Hemisphere. It is currently Thursday evening in California. Mr. Dave Behar. Did I say that right?
That's right.
They were just talking before we press record, and I'm just because I always got to try and make sure I pronounce names correctly.
Well, you have a very difficult name to pronounce.
Darren. It's pretty simple. It's almost like John Smith, and you forget people's names and say, "So how do I spell your name again?" John.
Yeah.
Smith. But Dave, looking forward to this conversation. You've got a fantastic backdrop, and I must commend you on the beautiful black. That looks like a paisley. Is that a paisley number as well?
Well, it's sort of paisley, but it's kind of embossed. There's a little velvety finish. Yeah.
Looks very, very classy.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I try to have a little bit of class. I'm always a student, and so you got to have class when you're a student.
Absolutely.
And teach.
And we're going to talk about potentially branding today as well, and
Very
personal
cool.
branding. So,
Yeah, let's do it.
you are the founder, CEO, and chief executive athlete. Get that, the chief executive athlete.
That's right.
Of Ion Network and Behar Brand. So you've been doing both of those for quite a number of years. And I'm really looking forward to delving into all things, not specifically sales, but a lot of the, I guess, the branding and the influence side of what you're doing, and maybe even some of the work you're doing at the university in the student level as well.
Sure.
So can I just ask you the first question? Because I'd love to get into your background in terms of how you ended up doing what you're doing, but where does chief executive athlete come from?
Well, I was a relatively successful athlete most of my early years. And, we all have to think about what makes us unique and differentiated in our workflow as well as just in personal life. Of course, I don't immediately say, hey, I'm the chief executive athlete in the first part of a conversation, but it does open up not just, doors, but conversation. And so, more or less, I'm playing many positions with our company, though we have a growing team that are great at their positions. So likewise, and I, of course, I'm always remaining active. And I think that's super important when you're a leader and in any realm of life and business and so forth, to stay active. And so that's kind of like the derivative of the chief executive athlete. And it differentiates a little bit too, because I'm not going to suggest there's only one chief executive athlete, but indeed there's a lot of CEOs. So I wear that hat also, of course.
Nice.
Yeah.
And when I look at that, it's almost like a little bit of a pattern interrupt, because certainly in business, you don't necessarily expect a left of center title. And as you mentioned, you don't necessarily lead with that in the first conversation, but it probably comes out. But it is a bit of a pattern interrupt that says, hey, there's something different about you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it does play a role in it does have an immediate connect and definitely curiosity. And even on the subject of sales, it's a conversation starter, even though that's not really why it's there. It's when you're leading a company let's say as a CEO or president, okay, everyone's a CEO, but not everyone can be a chief executive athlete. And I think that the differentiating is super important in terms of what we do and what I do. And it kind of relates to then my personal brand. And I don't spend a lot of time with my personal brand. I, if anything, help a lot of others in what we do. but it is part of my DNA, and it's got a history there. And at the same time, we are heavy in sports as a lot of our holdings as a company, and so it fits right in.
Love it. Love it. So with
Yeah.
that, can you tell us a little bit about the background, and because you've been running Ion Network for quite a number of years,
Mhm.
what was the genesis of that? What was your background that led you to this? Because I'm really intrigued as we kind of move into the conversation, particularly around branding and some of your
Yeah.
lessons through business. Where did all this originate? What was the catalyst?
Well, the catalyst was really in uh, I want to say the turn of the century in the year 2000. Um, there was a lot of activity going on with the internet and the I thing.
Mm,
So the I, and if for those that were around at that point, the E was important, but before that, before digital has become everything, my second startup was a company called iDig, and we were a worldwide leader in the world of sportswear, with a little emphasis in the sport of all things, volleyball. But that was
mhm.
iDig. And after selling that company, been through several exits, but um, I said, you know what, I'm going to go start building the I brands. And so did that, had some, good success in several different sports. And then this thing called the internet started really playing a role in my world. Of course, I was already heavy in media and technology. I said, okay, we did some merchandising. I know this is sort of maybe a long way to answer, but it's an interesting story that we were doing some merchandising around one of the conference championships that we were promoting, and it was, it was about what do you have your eye on, and I've got my eye on basketball and such. So there spawned the brand, saw the whole the internet taking shape in a very, very big way. And the only thing that wasn't around at that point was the pipes being opened up real wide for content.
Yeah,
And so thus the three-letter word, Ion. Of course, there's some very successful three-letter brands in media. And of course, we're then one of them, and we're growing, and we're very excited about our brand, and rely on Ion.
nice, nice.
Yeah, the
Because
network
then
of
you, what's that?
the network of champions.
Well, I was going to say in your bio, you talk about the network of champions. So I was just wondering whether it was that something that came after the Ion, or was it sort of a champion and you've taken
Yeah.
the Ions as part of it?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of Ion words, and again, that's part of our brand DNA.
Mm,
And the word champion is one of those great Ion ending words, and we can go on about that. There's some beautiful words in there that are very important in business, like
mm,
collaboration and integrity. Ion integrity. Anyway, so yeah, the network of champions. It is about winning. It's not necessarily winning and beating your competitor. It is just winning
mm.
and being successful. And our network then, is meant to lead and be very important and memorable to people and content creators, brands, and so the network of champions. And it's interesting because one of my projects and one of my call it clients that spent a lot of great time with the Pac-10 at the time. It's now the Pac-12, and that was the Conference of Champions. That was the winningest conference in the NCAA, collegiate sports in the U.S.
Yeah,
And so there was a little inspiration there. And of course, in this case, it's a media business that we have, and spawn a number of companies from there. So the network of
nice.
champions. Yeah.
Love it, love it. Because you, as you mentioned before we press record, you're across a number of different, I guess, industry sectors
Yeah.
and the network, and you guys build game-changing brands in those spaces.
Yeah.
Um,
A lot of events. I mean, back to the tagline, the network of champions. We are in a bunch of sports, and sports we believe in, and sports we try to help of course, elevate and monetize for those league operators and
Mm,
team operators, let alone the athletes. And so it fits right in the winning
mm,
formula.
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So, with a surfboard over your right shoulder,
Oh,
it would
yeah.
be remiss of me not to ask, does your network tentacles, and I say that respectfully, move into the surfing area?
Yeah, so we do things in surfing also, of course. Uh, Sitting right now in beautiful Hermosa Beach, California, which our offices are, a block from the ocean, and there's some great waves in Hermosa Beach, and of course up and down the coast. But yeah, we're definitely in the beach culture, and it also lends to us sometimes not taking things so serious,
Mm,
in terms of our DNA. And
yeah.
so it's great. Surfing's a very healthy sport, but we're also into a number of sports. And I don't want to say don't get me started there because they're pretty diverse, not just off the beach. You
Well, and with that, with the diversity of sports that you deal with, obviously they would have just like similar to businesses that have different nuances and different requirements and maybe different challenges. As the chief executive athlete of the business working with a range of different sports,
yeah.
is there any sort of commonality? Because I want to draw out some of the, I guess, some of the key things you look at or some of the key challenges that these sports have, even from a branding perspective, because you mentioned you do a lot of stuff in the media and helping them with their brand recognition. Is there some common threads or perhaps some really different challenges that maybe some sports would have against others?
Well, there's a commonality in its competition. I mean, that's more or less what sports is made up of, and that's not always winning and losing, but the realities. If you're talking about the business of sports, I mean, it's the first thing I think of. I'm a bit far better, let's call it brand builder and sports business guy than as a fan, but
Mm,
always looking through the fans' eyes, the athlete's eyes, and really the brand's eyes. When you're talking about then the sales process, the business development process of what each sport needs and needs to attract fans, attract merchandising sales, attract brand partners that align with their principles and again DNA as a sport and the vibe. So those are the things that many sports then have in common, whether they're individual sports or team sports, or for that matter, beach or action sports.
mm,
Um, and it's a sales process that there's again, and these sports are, leagues are all competing against each other, for that, whether it be the athlete or the brand partner. And that's, I think of important value because that goes back to the differentiation. But then the differentiation is knowing your market,
yeah.
because that same brand, for example, that is maybe attracted to, let's say, beach volleyball, may not be attracted to another sport that we have success in, which is arm wrestling.
Hmm.
Uh, you're
Arm
talking,
wrestling.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's a very popular sport. There's a professional side, and people, kids started doing it when they're in grade school. In some extent, a rites of passage, but it's a yeah, it's very we're very involved in the sport and the growth of it. But it's not the same as, again, an action sport or you bring up surfing. That would be, they're very different. But one thing is that they do have competitors. Those want to win. They want to win even money if there's
Mm.
money in that particular event, or during the course of a season. So
So if you've got, and you mentioned the word competition there, and if you think about, certainly in Australia, there appears to be, I think there's an infinite number amount of money really available globally, but maybe in certain sports there seems to be a certain amount of finite government funding, for example. So you've got a lot of sports competing for recognition to try and get funding, to try and get, whether it be scholarships and things like that.
Right.
I want to sort of toggle this conversation into the branding side in terms of whether it be branding for a sport, branding for a club, branding for an organization, but then down to branding for an individual in terms of some of the key things. So if we can start like at a macro level, when you are working in a field such as arm wrestling, right? So you've taught me all of a sudden something. Look, I knew
Right.
there was professional darts, but I didn't know there was professional arm wrestling, right?
Maybe there's some characters too. That makes up the personality of any sport, really.
I can
But
imagine. I can imagine.
anyway,
But when you're looking at a sport like that,
yeah,
how do you start? Because there'll be people listening to this and saying, you know what, we want to differentiate ourselves. We want to be something unique and how we can become attractive to the marketplace, either to attract funding, to attract fans, or to attract competitors.
yeah.
Where do you start at a sport like as an example?
Well, it all starts with the brand. I mean, in anything on the most part. And the brand needs to be evaluated and what's its reach, what's its participation levels, what's its watchability at the different platforms of media. You can obviously include that, social media and the different platforms there also.
Mm,
But um, you start with just, I mean, again, it depends what lens you're looking through. If you're looking through, for instance, a business lens of, gosh, should I get involved as a sponsor, as a brand partner, versus just someone that's not going to do a lot of evaluating as a fan or a consumer. They're going to think it's a good vibe, or the athletes are good looking, or it's exciting. But on the brand and the business side, it's like, okay, you can look at, well, is it making money? Is it,
mm,
what's the footprint? Um, and that does play a role in the brand, because if it's in Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, Perth, so on and so forth, in all the you know key cities, let's say in Australia, versus just one town, even
mm,
though one sport in one town, if it's big enough, can be great to have a great deal of revenue. But anyway, that's all part of the evaluation and what the brand is and the brand makeup, the reach, and you just start looking at the numbers. Um, and for that matter, every sport has equipment, and everyone eats and drinks. So there's so many different brand partner categories, and you look at those too. Who's currently involved, or who maybe used to be involved? Um, and for that matter, what does the growth curve look like?
mm,
There'd be an example of even Aussie rules football. It's like, okay, so is that played in other countries, or is it just ultra dominant in the country of Australia? And maybe that's a good thing.
mm,
But so, and then again, it depends on what your outcome you're looking for, because then it comes down. This is one of my favorite iron words, is conversion. So if you're a brand, right, it's like, okay, if I'm getting involved in this sport, what are we getting out of it? Are we going to, move the needle in terms of more products sold into a retailer or an online, a brick and mortar or online retailer?
yeah,
Are we simply looking for more followers from a social standpoint? And then, of course, you make the evaluation from there too. So,
yeah,
what's the return on investment, needed? So, yeah, as far as looking at, you know, uh, what league or what sport or what event, and those become decisions, from a marketing standpoint, of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots of, I guess, business analysis and market analysis that you do in order to figure out what's the current share of wallet, what's the addressable market, what are the opportunities, and you make business decisions based on that.
Yeah.
How involved do you get then in the, I guess, the looking at the excuse me, the specific people within that in terms of the characters?
Well, I mean, we're, among other things, we're in the media and e-commerce business. So we do have a business model that's related to there being success just for our own platforms in our own company.
Yep.
Besides, so we have to validate another, what other brands involvement and attraction might be. So the example is part of our evaluation, or mine, is what does this league look like? Or
Mhm.
is it really existing? And is it even a league, or is it a tour,
Yeah.
something else, a series? And maybe it is needs to be renamed. I can tell you that very recently we just renamed a league that needed a name, actually, and that's in the world of night fighting. And I say night fighting, I mean KNIGHT,
As the
with
Knights of the Round Table.
the armor, yeah. But I mean, there's some. Hey, I got to tell you, we're really looking forward to this and what we're going to be bringing and adding. Um, and there's no question it's the real deal, and there's incredible following already, but it also needed to find its way. And so we've developed a brand that is going to really help it find its way and be understandable to what is a league and what is the collection of people at the highest level besides what is grassroots.
Mm.
Each one has their own sales formula, if you will, but at the same time, now there's then an attraction to what is now going to be the KFL,
The
night
KFL, the Night
KFL.
Fighting League.
That's right.
Love it.
So, and then when you ask about how do we get involved? Well, I mean, we name things. I mean, it all starts with the brand. And how
Yeah.
does that make somebody feel, um, when they see it? And you want them to wear it and, of course, engage and be there and participate, whether as an athlete or as a fan. So, and certainly from a brand level, we love activation. It's a great iron word, but it's what brands do to engage, and should do.
And from that, it's obviously publicity. It's
Oh
obviously
yeah.
the strength of the competition. It's the characters within the competition. But as you
Yep.
said, it's the followers, it's the fans that are wearing, I don't know, the California Knight Riders, and they've got those colors and all the merchandise and
Right.
activation that comes from that.
It's affinity. I mean, it comes down to people's association with their affinity, whether it be that team, their town. Not every sport has what is a town and local model, and it may not need it.
Yeah,
Many sports shouldn't have it,
yeah.
but yeah, but people do come from places and want to support often their local team besides what is more of a national hero, and top athlete. So
And
you go
how that's awesome. And how I'm trying to think of the right way to ask this because you've got a lot of obvious sports that most people would think about, the baseball, NFL, football, basketball, and stuff like that, right? But
right?
then, as you've just described, we've got arm wrestling, we've got night fighting, all these sports that probably don't get the recognition, probably don't get the bandwidth on mainstream media. The role that you guys play in all the work you do around branding, and it's probably a loaded question, Dave, so I apologize ahead of time, but how important is the work you do to keep those sports and hence those brands sustainable?
Well, let's go back to the term affinity, and for that matter, purists, because there are the athletes of all these different sports, and that's their sport. And for that matter, the leaders in each sport, whether they are an event director, somebody who's running a league, um, and even for that matter, there could be certain sports that a leader of a company says, "Hey, I played this growing up or successfully in school or in college, whatever. I'm a big fan," and that's why they participate. That's why they support and brand align their brand with it.
Mm.
But really, at the end of the day, this is about alignments, and yeah.
And so with that, because that's the macro level. Now let's talk about because I'll as you were talking, I'm thinking of like World Championship Wrestling or whatever WWE or WWF, whatever the case
Right.
might be. So they've got a brand at a macro level,
Yeah.
but then they've got individuals within that who also have their own brands and all the publicity that goes with that, which may be curated or may be created, but
Yeah,
how important is it?
oh, super important. I mean, again, it's the makeup of what the model is. Like, if there are teams in a league, there's a very good chance that the team has their own publicity. Certainly, they would have their own athletes. Some of those athletes, depending on how, necessarily well they're paid, but they might have their own publicist and certainly their own followers,
Mm,
and to position them as personal brand, as well as having even personal sponsors, et cetera. So it's all super important. And at the micro level, each one of the sports, they're fighting for their, again, attraction and eyeballs. So really, at the end of the day, it's you've got a number of major sports, and you mentioned mainstream media, but even that term is, I'm not going to say it's outdated. It's, the amount of eyeballs and integration in social and digital
yeah,
channels. You have far more people's eyes on the web, and then for them are their favorite sport, because that's what they're looking for.
yeah.
And then they're looking for those backstories, the storytelling with the athletes, and for that matter, anything that's related to, again, that sport or that town, and even injury reports and things like that. So, we like to fulfill as much as possible, because again, some of these sports, from our standpoint, we're guiding those sports or guiding those leagues. On the other hand, we also serve as media for major sports. So we're either way aligned with the major sports, and for that matter, the sports that you may not think are major. But I can assure you that those athletes and those folks involved think that their sport is major. And
Of
for
course.
have even more participants
Mm,
than that major sport. It just may not have had the professional level
yeah,
addressed effectively.
yeah, yeah.
It's all pretty interesting stuff.
Well, it's
Yeah.
fascinating as you were talking. I'm thinking you because you mentioned Australian rules football before, and over the
Yeah.
last probably 10 years in particular, I think the statistics say there are now more people reporting on the sport of Australian rules football in Australia than there are players playing at a professional level, which
Okay.
means the competition then for the story and whether it be the leading story or the backstory or something to differentiate against everybody else. So I guess all of these reporters are fighting in a sea of competition to try to differentiate themselves, and often they're creating stories that, let's be honest, are not necessarily 100% true.
Yeah,
So
right.
that
Well,
creates another challenge.
I'll tell you, Darren, it's one of those things. If you are actually talking about the, let's say, the industry of journalism, the news or sports media, that's one thing. The other thing is, everyone who has a social media account at whatever platform, they're their own network.
Yeah,
So it could be that wherever the numbers you're talking about come from, it could be those that have, applied for a credential or have been given access, whatever. But I mean, don't forget, if there's 12 or 15 players on the field or
mm,
something, in the stands alone, and in the stadium, in the arenas, there could be thousands. And
yeah,
then they are all networks. They're all, again, on their phones, their smartphones, cranking away and posting. And yeah, I guess there needs to be some definition as to who is, that credentialed media or doing their thing. But yeah, it's interesting. But I mean, it's
100%.
all good for the teams as long as it's not taking away their revenue from a media standpoint.
Yeah,
But it's visibility, and those are all,
yeah,
when we talk about sales, those are
yeah,
all sales prospects too, because they're going to wear
absolutely.
that jersey, the replica jersey,
Yeah.
replica ball. or, whatever piece of equipment, let
Yeah.
alone.
And a lot of organizations will say, hey, we have more and more people talking about us,
Yeah,
but as
that's
much
right.
as possible, we want to control the narrative around what they're talking about us, then give a bit more control. But even with that, there are some that will just go off because they're the outliers. You just need to be taking some of those with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, they're all, listen, I mean, you can talk about blogging, you could talk about folks that are, content creators, depending to what level, and they all generally would want to monetize. And so that becomes part of a sales process, whether it's official or not,
mm,
related to that team.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk about personal branding because I'd love to pick your brain on this. So I have certain, I guess, views, and often the workshops I run with sales teams and sales leaders, we talk about
You do it well.
we do we do it with, and I talk about personal branding insofar as you need to understand what you stand for and what you represent, what you want to I guess project out into the marketplace. But ultimately, your personal brand is how others will see you. So
Yeah.
I'd love your thoughts on some key principles of personal branding that particularly leaders, and let's take it leaders of the sports that you're working with, who are wanting to not only increase their own, I guess, reputation in the industry, but by default increase the reputation and the attractiveness of their sport. What are
Yeah.
some core principles that these guys need to be conscious of that can help accelerate that brand recognition?
You mean personal brand recognition?
Personal, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess first of all is maybe a little bit of self-evaluation would be helpful. Um, you know, um, and that is of your reputation. So is there
Mm,
anything that people may not really be too happy with you about or think you're the best thing in the world? And what are your attributes? Um, and I'll get a little granular for a minute because when you're talking about personal branding, even knowing your colors, your season that you look good in, um, let alone if knowing whether you're introverted, extroverted, those different characteristics are, how old are you, or what have you done in your life that is even a talking point, let alone what people may know you as, because
mm,
that's something that you carry with you. And for that matter, could be your tribe. And there's no one that's going to support you more than your tribe
mm,
versus people who don't know you necessarily, or aren't in, let's say, your industry or your sport. Of course, a lot of folks might be envious and not want to see you succeed. I mean, even friends may not want to see you succeed, that whole thing. But at the same time, so you're wanting to do some evaluation and kind of who you are, where you're headed, because just like a business, I mean, you're creating like a business plan,
mm,
and then where do you want to take it? Is there an exit strategy? Not to suggest that exit is death or something. It's more about what are you really trying to achieve? Do you want to be a public speaker? Do you want to be a CEO? Are you a CEO? Um, and or just excel because there's again different reasons you take us certain directions, but take a look at your reputation first and those elements. When I teach a little bit of personal branding and when I speak on it a little bit, there's always these components that I'll ask the audience about for them to take those kind of notes, and some a little more formally, but at the same time, it's like, okay, now where do you want to go?
mm.
And what's the goal? Not necessarily a dream, because dreams could just be dreams,
Yeah.
and then you go from there. So, and I'll always go back to, again, even basic stuff like I mentioned colors, what you wear, and what drains out your skin. And when you're either on camera or in pictures or whatever it is, what's convincing.
Yeah.
if that's what you need to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, is that kind of helpful?
Yeah, well, it is, and I mean,
Things to think.
I think about it from a personal point of view, and you look at people in the marketplace, whether it be sport, entertainment, business, whatever,
Yeah.
and there are some that stand out, and so there's just something about them. It's they've got a strong reputation. It could be the consistency of the color or the branding, or you see them in different environments, but they look the same and they stand out. And you think, there goes Dave, right? He's got he's got his nice black
Well,
and boss shirt.
oh,
Um,
I was going to ask you, Darren, if you have a nickname, and or if somebody has given you a nickname, um, or for that matter, have you given yourself one? And not that that's everything, but it's interesting how even that plays a role, what people might know you as.
yeah,
Uh, and that also is part of that, your definition, and
yeah,
then personality, of
yeah.
course.
And so as an example, our eldest daughter, her name is Kiralee.
But here
Right?
you were going to have a confession opportunity. I said, you have a nickname.
Yeah, well, my nickname used to be Dazza. People still call me Dazza. That's very
Uh-huh.
Australian, right?
Well,
Surname is
you say
Mitchell.
that, so, but do people know what that is?
Do they know what it is?
Yeah, it does it.
Well, they just say Dazza. That's just I was going to say my eldest daughter's name is Kiralee,
Okay.
and my wife and I picked that name, or specifically my wife, because she thought that that couldn't be shortened into a nickname. But
Yeah.
she played AFL footy when she was younger, and her AFL coach gave her the nickname Kizza. So it was very, very Australian, and she also calls herself Kizza a lot now. So, um, but again, I mean, when people look at Dazza or when they look at Kizza, they think, what does it actually mean, right?
Yeah.
But it's not something that I didn't name myself Dazza. Others did that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it does and it could cause curiosity.
Mm,
And is that a popular name? Is it a not so popular name? And I think there's some value to that, of
yeah,
course.
yeah,
Mem from being memorable.
yeah,
And um,
yeah. Hence
so,
the hence the chief executive athlete.
well, it's interesting. I mean, I have had a number of different nicknames depending on which group they were from, including the fraternity and the different sport teams and such. And it's interesting how even to this day they can stick with you.
Yeah,
Do you remember if on the subject of personal branding, it's not like I caused it to happen. It's just what it invokes in people and what they think of you, or how it makes them feel when they see you or just around you, and then of course vice versa.
mm.
So I think it's pretty interesting stuff, and again, it's never too late to be thinking about that at whatever age. So.
Well, that brings me to the next question in terms of we've talked about some core principles in relation to the personal branding, know your reputation, your colors, names and naming conventions, self-evaluation, all that sort of stuff.
Seasons,
If
by the way, on the colors. It's winter, spring, summer, fall, and
Yeah,
that represents groups of colors. Just an FYI. But,
yeah,
yeah.
and like I had a personal branding expert work with me a few years ago who said based on everything, there were certain colors that fitted well with you versus others that didn't. And I've tried my best to do that since then. And even the colors in my branding has been very specific around what that represents. So to the point where
Gold medal sitting there in the gold and the black, you
well,
know?
you know what? You're talking about night fighting. I actually, when I was getting that done, I said, I want to be able to incorporate exceptional sales leader in
Yeah.
a some sort of shield. So the lady that did the branding, so you can see the
Yeah,
exceptional sales leader, it's almost like a shield that's being created.
that's right.
And the gold is to say, well, it needs to be meaningful, and the black, it's not actually black, but it's a dark blue. as a contrast. So it's very specific. But because I wanted it, because when you look at the word exceptional, I couldn't have exceptional being like red. It just wouldn't have
Mm,
worked, right? It had to be a connection to that.
yeah.
So I know you do a lot of work with the San Diego State University,
Oh
and
yeah.
you teach personal branding there, or work with them on that.
Yeah, I mean, again, the personal branding thing comes everywhere, with me. Not always teaching or something, but speak to audiences at the university on the subject. Even though today, it's far more about social
Yeah,
than personal branding, if you will, just
yeah,
to what hot topics, et cetera. But yeah, I really love the university. The old Aztecs, San Diego State. But yeah, I graduated from the university, and I'm on the board of the Journalism and Media Studies School, which is really on a roll, and
nice.
it's doing great, and it's just great. This is the leaders of tomorrow. I mean,
Yeah,
every school in the different departments have the leaders, and they'll be obviously graduating into their own companies or doing great things and working for other companies. But it's really great being
love it.
involved and helping, guide which whatever I can, being on the board there. So
Brilliant, brilliant.
yeah,
So with that, because we've mentioned social, we've mentioned you pretty much started the company back when the internet was sort of about to take off and the e-commerce going nuts.
yeah,
With the proliferation of social and the fact that everybody pretty much is their own network, they can be
yeah,
their own journalist, they can write things about you, irrespective of whether they're correct or not.
right.
Particularly when you're talking to young people.
Or AI can.
Or AI can, absolutely, right? Which is another question I want to ask you about. But when you're thinking about creating your personal brand, being intentional with what it is that you want to be known for
Yeah,
in the marketplace, and I know that we have to be really clear on what we put out there because people are watching. Are there any specific strategies for people listening to this who might be really looking at how they can maybe turn their brand, rebrand themselves, or be really intentional with putting something out there that people will hopefully start to see them in a slightly different light? What kind of strategies do you share with people in relation to personal branding that we can have a level of control over?
boy, that's I don't know if it's a loaded question, but
I didn't mean it to be a
no,
loaded question.
seriously, Darren, it's kind of like it's that self-evaluation. And then for that matter, it's what's really important, I think, is feedback. And again, you get to make the decision because it's your brand. But I think asking the question of those around you who they may not be offering what their opinion is, whether again that truly personal thing, even down to some personality traits or something, or look how you look and how you project yourself and how you appear out in the marketplace, as an
Mm,
example. So I think getting the feedback is super important. And then setting an appointment with yourself, set a meeting with yourself to focus on just that. Doesn't mean that that couldn't be with an individual who's kind of been around the block, maybe with personal branding or just branding and let's call it marketing. But at the same time, is to say, well, what is it that's broken that you need to fix? What is it that you need to, is it simply, you want to get some more followers, or you want to get some kind of gig or some kind of initiative in play that you need to have a certain look or something?
mm,
Well, what is it? And if you don't know, then is where the feedback would be very helpful. But again, it just comes down to self-evaluation. I don't know how else to really describe it. And it's like, okay, checking the boxes is we did touch on that earlier a little bit, but maybe you look at your wardrobe, and I mean, not to just pull it out of blue or something, but it does come down to colors.
Mm,
And if you're talking about how you look on paper or your website, your personal website,
mm,
it's what is it that you actually want to achieve?
yeah.
Uh, are you getting that accomplished? And you have to ask yourself, what is that call to action? And if it's simply that doesn't play a role, you don't need for it to play a role, then you don't necessarily need to do it. But I definitely would not, I would always make sure it's authentic, rather than have it be something that you think people, will be attracted to, and you might be overdoing it. So,
Well,
um,
that's the question I wanted to ask you in relation to that because I
yeah,
get the self-evaluation. I'm intrigued when you're working with either businesses or sports teams, leagues, or maybe even individuals in some capacity, how much of this self-evaluation is doing some work around what their actual values are, what they want to be known for, what's important to them.
yeah. I mean, that is a very powerful word, is the values, and then your shared values with those around you that
Yeah,
you want to attract, and that you want to have on board with you. So, you can use words like heart and soul. What's in your heart, what's what's in your soul, and because you have to carry that with you
yeah.
for sure.
So
I
for
hope
people,
that's
is what's that?
no, I mean, because it's like it may be kind of an out there term, but what's your purpose? What's your why for that matter?
Yeah,
And it's like, well, answer the question because it is part of who you are.
totally.
And as you grow up a little bit, you learn more about yourself. You have your
Mm,
experiences and the mistakes, failures, if you will, that you learn
mm,
from them. And hopefully you do take something back from each of them and say, well, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to, and whether it's a pivot or something like that, but that goes back to your story and what your values are today. And that's, those things can change over the course of time, but you got to remember that, you know, today is today and tomorrow is
mm.
tomorrow. You've got to, treat each one as it is. So,
I think that's a really important point because you talk about social and the people today, and particularly kids that are now early teenagers, late teenagers, early in their early 20s.
yeah.
They're all very proficient on social. In fact, they would prefer to communicate via social than face to face or over the phone.
Yeah.
So I'd love your thoughts on branding, the self-regulation, the self-evaluation, the feedback, but also the challenge of not falling into the trap of comparing with others who we see as the icon of an industry or the champion player in a particular league. I want to just be like that person, and then I'll now create my brand around that person.
So I almost want you to maybe unpack that question a little bit because I mean, it sounds like should there be a comparison with you in that star or elite person athlete? And I mean, what are the attributes that you like about them? And you can, I say borrow them, but
Mm,
you can, and if they're respected, then those are good things to consider. And, whether it be then follow them as you probably would be, but learn more about them and what got them to where they are. And those principles, I think, are super important to carry out as part of your value set. And as far as projecting it, it's like, well, you've also got to be real with who you are today and
yeah,
what you aspire to be tomorrow, and
yeah,
be able to be authentic about sharing that, communicating that, versus it being kind of a not truthful, I guess.
And that's the angle that I was sort of coming from. So I didn't mean it to sound like a loaded question, but it was a case of because
It's
we
all
know
good.
there are people out there that love to compare themselves with others, and they see people that have huge numbers of followers on Instagram or on Snapchat or on TikTok, and you think, oh my God, in order for me to be successful, that's my model, but they try to become that person. So in the
Mhm.
process, they can often compromise their own personal brand and not do the work that we've been talking about. That's the
Yeah, yeah. I guess some of the advice I give is this that you don't need a million followers. You just need to have the followers that suit you of what you're trying to achieve.
yeah,
Because God knows that you could turn on a campaign to achieve, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers. And it certainly can take money and whatever else, but you just don't necessarily need all those quote unquote followers unless they're required as part of where you're headed.
yeah,
And if you talk about being in an industry, it's like, where's the decisions being made? Because having all those followers does not automatically mean success, and
yeah,
for that matter, sales.
mm,
It's you one way or another, you were able to collect some numbers, and maybe it was a viral video that had nothing to do with what you believe in. It's just you happen to be connected to it, and therefore people are liking and following and this and that.
yeah,
But what's your goal, and be realistic about that goal, and not worry about that person that's 20 years older than you, or for that matter is in an industry that's not related to yours, that they're able to collect that many
mm,
followers and such. And no matter what your age is, and
yeah,
certainly um, those followers can also be duplicates. They can be fake, and there's a lot of
yeah,
stuff going on out there, as you know. But those same followers can be duplicates of 20 of your friends, and how does that make you different? And are they even checking you out
yeah,
if you're posting and doing that? So then there's the level of engagement, because engagement is the real judge. you
yeah.
know Engagement, then if you're in business, conversion,
Yeah.
you and
That's
sustainability.
it. That's it. That's it. So there, and what we're saying there is don't get caught up in the vanity metrics. Just get caught up in the metrics that are tangible, that will give you an indication that you're making progress.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. Love it.
Progression is everything, and again, get to know where you're headed.
Yeah.
And
Which
yeah,
I think is really important for leaders listening to this as well. Get really clear on what you stand for, what's important to you. Do that self-evaluation. Make sure you're getting the right feedback from the people in your network who you value their not so much their opinion, but their perspective that might give you a different view of yourself that perhaps you might have a blind side to. And through that, take it and see how you can improve.
absolutely. I mean, it's kind of a business thing with brand versus personal, but are you filling voids
Yeah.
also? You
Yeah.
know, so and are you suited to do that? And if not, then maybe you figure out how to
Yeah,
fill.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've been nearly talking for an hour, Dave, and
Well,
it
that.
goes really quickly, right? So I wanted to ask you about AI, and you hear a lot about AI and GPT and all the generative artificial intelligence. Apple Intelligence has now created something on their
Yeah.
Macs and stuff like that. How do you see AI having an impact on brand strategy, the work that you're doing? Is it something that can enhance, or is it something that might um, create a bit of a challenge?
All the above.
Yeah,
I mean, it, as you know, it can have a life of its own, but it also, generally humans train AI to do what it's meant to do, or does what it does.
mm,
Whether it be creating algorithms, let alone inputting to achieve a certain result. So, but it's really another management function to protect your brand, for that matter, your reputation, because hey, listen, a story can break, and all of a sudden you got some AI bots that whether they have their own websites or social accounts, whatever it is, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden you have, you know, dozens of stories on the same thing, but done the way that the AI has been trained to
Hmm.
report or promote, whatever you want to call it. So now you've got to have a little bit of watchdog on those kinds of things. But at the same time, as a business tool, as a tool to help you gain efficiencies, it's going to be just about how you train it to
Mm.
work for you.
Yeah.
Whatever tool you're pulling out of one of the many growing AI boxes. So, but it's a double-edged sword, you know. It's a, it's not a mystery. I mean, AI has been around, as you know, for a
Yeah.
couple decades.
Yeah.
We just didn't know it, and now it's
Yeah.
become more mainstream. More folks developing those tools, and it rising because of our digital culture.
Mm.
But, don't let anything surprise you. And for that matter, I say, hey, I'm AI. I'm not even Dave Behar talking to you right now. I need to talk to you, but listen, yeah, it's you can use it to your greatest advantage, but also it could be some disadvantages, and
Mm.
it depends on, again, who you are, your business, its needs,
Yeah.
and you want to be very careful about if you're utilizing it that could potentially plagiarize or could potentially, you know, imposition yourself,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
without you knowing and expecting it to do the
Yeah.
opposite.
Yeah.
So,
So and I've spoken to a lot of people around this topic, and a lot of them like to think, yeah, what you've just said, there's positives and not so positive. Just got to keep a watchful eye. But generally, they think it's more a case of this is going to be augmented intelligence, it's going to help us speed up a lot of the stuff. But we've also got to be conscious of, and particularly this is where it comes in line with your personal brand and your business brand, to make sure that whatever it's generating, it
yeah,
is still consistent with what you want to represent in the marketplace, etc. So that's where the feedback becomes really important. So just don't rely on AI to create something and say, right, that's what I said. I'm going to put that in the marketplace. You got
right.
to stress test it and make sure it's
You
consistent
also
with
got
what
to
you stand
police
for.
it though too. I mean, not
Yeah,
to be negative, but you do need to know that there's bots that pick up things and are just designed to, have it in their own words or whatever,
yeah,
and or define it themselves.
yeah,
So it's a management function that we now have to take seriously. So
100%, 100%. So Dave, very conscious of time. It's probably about 20 to 8, so you're probably very hungry or needing a beer.
we're good. All the above.
We
I'm
did
looking
joke
forward to having a
this.
beer with you sometime too,
No,
Darren.
it's all good. Love to. Love to. So,
Yeah.
mate, for people listening to this who want to know more about Dave the man, but also the chief executive athlete, and all the things that you guys are doing at Ion Network, where's the best place for them to check you out?
Yeah, I mean, you can pop over to ions.com. It's just ion with plural. I'm over in like LinkedIn a little bit. But that's a good place to look as ions and or just do a search.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nice. Love it.
go from there and love getting feedback, and of course anything could do to help you succeed.
Brilliant.
So,
Brilliant.
yeah,
Dave, it's
yep.
been a fascinating conversation, and I greatly
Likewise.
appreciate coming on the podcast, my friend.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All the best, mate.
See you again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com, and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.